My mother told me I was dead. I was sitting right in front of her, breathing, crying, begging her to understand. But to her, I had already stopped existing. She looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize, eyes that held no warmth, no recognition, no love. And she said the words that would echo in my mind for the next 7 years. The Emma I raised died today. I don't know who you are. I remember the silence that followed. I remember my father staring at the carpet. I remember my 2 older brothers sitting on the couch across from me, their faces frozen somewhere between anger and pity. I remember the framed picture of Jesus on the wall behind my mother, the one that had hung there my entire life, watching over our family. And I remember thinking in that moment that I had made a terrible mistake by telling the truth. My name is Emma Richardson, and this is the story of how I lost my family, my faith, and everything I thought I knew about myself. It's also the story of how I found something I never knew I was missing: my own life. I grew up in Provo, Utah, in the shadow of the Wasatch Mountains and the even larger shadow of the Mormon Church. If you've never been to Provo, it's hard to explain what it feels like to live there. The church isn't just a part of life, it is life. Every neighbor, every teacher, every store owner, every friend, everyone goes to church on Sunday. Everyone knows your business. Everyone watches to make sure you're living right. The mountains are beautiful, the streets are clean, and the expectations are impossible. My family had been members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for 5 generations. My great-great-grandfather walked across the plains with a handcart. My grandfather served as a stake president. My father, Richard, was the bishop of our ward, which meant he was responsible for the spiritual welfare of about 400 people. My mother, Caroline, was the president of the Relief Society, the women's organization. My 2 older brothers, Tyler and Josh, had both served honorable 2-year missions, Tyler in Argentina and Josh in the Philippines. They had both been married in the temple, sealed to their wives for time and all eternity. They were doing everything right. And then there was me, the youngest, the only daughter, the one who was supposed to complete the picture. For 18 years, I did exactly that. I was the perfect Mormon girl. I woke up at 5:30 every morning to attend seminary, the religious education classes that Mormon teenagers take before school. I read my scriptures daily. I kept a gratitude journal. I never missed a Sunday meeting, not once, not even when I was sick. I was called as the young women president at 16, which meant I helped lead the girls' program in our ward. My teachers wrote notes to my parents about my sweet spirit. My bishop told me I was an example to the other youth. I had a testimony. I bore it at the pulpit on fast Sundays, crying as I told the congregation how much I loved the gospel, how I knew Joseph Smith was a true prophet, how I knew the Book of Mormon was the word of God. And here's the thing. I believed it. I believed all of it. I didn't perform those tears. They were real. I didn't pretend to love the church. I genuinely did. It was my entire world, my entire identity, my entire understanding of who I was and why I existed. I was a daughter of God. I had a divine purpose. I was going to be married in the temple, have children, raise them in the gospel, and return to live with Heavenly Father for eternity. That was the plan. That was always the plan. I had no idea how fragile that plan was. I had no idea that it was built on a foundation I had never been allowed to examine. When I was 17, I started dating Ethan Palmer. He was 23, recently returned from his mission in Brazil, attending BYU and looking for a wife. In Mormon culture, this is normal. Returned missionaries are encouraged to marry quickly, and girls like me are encouraged to say yes. Ethan was tall, handsome in a clean-cut way, and everyone approved of him. My parents loved him. My brothers respected him. The other girls in my ward were jealous. He was exactly what I was supposed to want. Our courtship followed the script perfectly. We held hands, we went on group dates, we kissed, but never for too long. We talked about our future, about how many children we wanted, about what we would name them. He gave me a promise ring after 4 months. We talked about getting married in the Provo Temple after I finished my first year at BYU. Everything was happening exactly as it was supposed to happen. But sometimes, late at night, I would lie in bed and feel something I couldn't name. A restlessness, an emptiness. I would look at the ring on my finger and try to feel the excitement I was supposed to feel. And instead, I felt nothing but a vague unease, like I was reading lines in a play I hadn't auditioned for. I told myself it was just nerves. I told myself it was Satan trying to plant doubts. I prayed for the feeling to go away. I never told anyone about it, not even Ethan. Especially not Ethan. If stories like this resonate with you, if you've ever felt like you were living someone else's life, following a script you never chose, you're not alone. There are thousands of us with stories like this. If these experiences speak to you, subscribe to this channel. There are many more untold stories waiting to be shared. I started at Brigham Young University in the fall, just as planned. I was majoring in elementary education, just as planned. I was living in the dorms, attending my ward, going on dates with Ethan, just as planned. Everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. And then, in the second week of my first semester, everything started to fall apart. It happened in a religion class. Every BYU student is required to take religion courses, and I was in a class called Foundations of the Restoration. The professor was an older man, very faithful, very knowledgeable. One day, while discussing the translation of the Book of Mormon, he mentioned something called the Gospel Topics Essays. He said they were essays published on the church's official website that addressed some of the more difficult aspects of church history. He encouraged us to read them, to strengthen our testimonies. That night, I went to the church's website and found the essays. I wasn't looking to doubt. I was looking to strengthen my faith, just as the professor had suggested. I was a good student. I did my homework. I wanted to understand my religion better so I could defend it better. I started with the essay about the translation of the Book of Mormon. What I read made my stomach drop. According to the essay, Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon by placing a seer stone in a hat, putting his face in the hat to block out the light, and reading the words that appeared on the stone. The golden plates, the ones I had seen in every painting, the ones the angel Moroni delivered, were often not even in the room. Sometimes they were covered with a cloth. Sometimes they were hidden in the woods nearby. The translation happened through a rock in a hat. I had never heard this before. Not once. Not in 18 years of church attendance, not in 4 years of seminary, not in countless Sunday school lessons about the translation. I had been taught that Joseph used the Urim and Thummim, special spectacles that came with the plates. No one had ever mentioned a rock in a hat. I told myself there must be an explanation. I kept reading. The next essay I read was about plural marriage in the early church. I knew that early Mormons had practiced polygamy. Everyone knew that. But I didn't know the details. I didn't know that Joseph Smith had married approximately 30 to 40 women. I didn't know that some of them were as young as 14. I didn't know that some of them were already married to other men who were still alive, men who were sometimes sent away on missions while Joseph married their wives. I didn't know that Joseph kept many of these marriages secret, even from his first wife Emma. I felt sick, physically sick. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, trying to breathe, but I couldn't stop. Over the next few weeks, I read all of the Gospel Topics essays. I learned about the different accounts of the first vision, how Joseph told the story differently at different times, how some early versions didn't mention God the Father at all. I learned about the Book of Abraham, how Joseph claimed to translate it from Egyptian papyrus, how scholars later determined the papyrus was actually common funeral documents that had nothing to do with Abraham. I learned about the priesthood and temple ban that prevented Black members from receiving full blessings until 1978, and how the church now disavowed the racist theories that previous prophets had used to justify it. Everything I read was from the church's own website. These weren't anti-Mormon lies. These were facts that the church itself had published, but I had never been taught any of it. I had been given a sanitized version, a faithful version, a version that left out anything that might cause doubt. I found other sources. I found the CES letter, a document written by a member who had compiled his questions and concerns. I found podcasts and forums and websites full of people who had gone through exactly what I was going through. I learned the term shelf, the metaphorical place where Mormons put their doubts and questions, trusting that they will be answered someday. And I learned what happens when your shelf gets too heavy when you put one too many items on it and it comes crashing down. My shelf didn't just crack, it shattered. For 6 months, I carried this secret alone. I smiled at church. I held Ethan's hand. I said my prayers out loud while my mind screamed in silence. I pretended to be the same Emma I had always been, but inside I was someone else entirely, someone I didn't recognize, someone who didn't know what was true anymore. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, going through motions that had lost all meaning. I wanted to talk to someone, but who could I tell? My parents would be devastated. My brothers would lecture me. Ethan would be horrified. My friends were all Mormon, every single one. I had no one outside the church. I had never needed anyone outside the church. That was the point. That was how it was designed. But secrets don't stay buried forever. And mine was about to explode in the worst possible way. Not because I confessed, but because someone confessed for me. It was a Thursday evening in March when I finally tried to talk to Ethan. We were sitting in his car outside my dormitory, the heater running, the windows fogging up from our breath. I had been quiet all through dinner, pushing my food around my plate, giving one-word answers to his questions. He knew something was wrong. He had known for weeks. I could see it in the way he looked at me, the concern mixed with something else, something that looked almost like fear. "Emma, what's going on with you?" he asked, turning to face me. His voice was gentle, patient, the voice of a returned missionary who had been trained to help people with their problems. "You've been distant lately. Is it school? Is it us?" I stared at my hands in my lap. The promise ring caught the streetlight, glinting like an accusation. I had practiced this conversation 100 times in my head, but now that the moment was here, the words stuck in my throat. How do you tell the person you're supposed to marry that you're not sure you believe in the thing your entire relationship is built on? "I've been reading some things," I said quietly. "About church history, things I didn't know before." Ethan nodded slowly. "Okay, like what?" "Like the translation of the Book of Mormon, the rock in the hat. And Joseph's marriages, how many there were, how young some of them were, and the different versions of the first vision, and the Book of Abraham." I was speaking faster now, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. "It's all on the church's website, Ethan. These aren't anti-Mormon lies. The church published these essays, and I've been a member my whole life, and nobody ever told me any of this. Why didn't anyone tell me?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. "I've read some of that stuff too. On my mission, we had investigators bring up those questions. The thing is, Emma, none of it changes the truth of the gospel. You have to look at it with spiritual eyes, not worldly eyes. Doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith." I had heard that phrase before. It was something Elder Uchtdorf had said in a general conference talk, and it had become a kind of mantra for dealing with difficult questions. Doubt your doubts. Don't trust your own mind. Don't trust the evidence in front of you. Trust the feeling in your heart, the feeling you were taught to interpret as the Holy Ghost. "But what if my doubts are based on facts?" I asked. "What if the things I'm reading are true?" "Then you pray about it," Ethan said. "You fast. You read your scriptures. You attend the temple. You do the things that invite the Spirit, and the Spirit will confirm the truth. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked." I wanted to scream. I had done all of those things. I had prayed until my knees ached. I had fasted until I was dizzy. I had read and studied and pleaded with God to help me understand, to give me back my testimony, to make the doubts go away. And nothing happened. The heavens were silent. The feelings didn't come. The only thing I felt was a growing certainty that I'd been lied to my entire life. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and said, "You're right, I'll keep trying." Ethan reached over and took my hand. "I love you, Emma. We're going to get through this together. Everyone has doubts sometimes. It's part of the test. The important thing is that you keep choosing faith." I looked at him, at his earnest face, his certain eyes, and I felt a wave of despair wash over me. He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. To him, this was a temporary trial, a speed bump on the road to our eternal marriage. He had no idea that I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at the wreckage of everything I had ever believed. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of my dorm room. My roommate was asleep, her breathing slow and even, her scriptures open on her nightstand. I thought about what Ethan had said. Doubt your doubts. Choose faith. Keep trying. But what if trying wasn't enough? What if faith wasn't a choice you could make, but a feeling you either had or didn't have? What if the reason I couldn't feel the Spirit anymore was because there was nothing to feel? The questions circled in my mind like vultures, and I had no answers. All I had was a growing conviction that I couldn't keep pretending. 3 weeks later, I ended the engagement. We were in his apartment this time, sitting on opposite ends of his couch. I had asked to talk, and he had agreed, though I could tell from his expression that he already knew something was wrong. I didn't drag it out. I couldn't. I can't marry you, Ethan, I said. I'm sorry. I've tried to make this work. I've tried to feel what I'm supposed to feel, but I can't. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. He stared at me like I had slapped him. What are you talking about? Is this about those essays? Emma, I told you, everyone has doubts. You just have to push through them. It's not just the essays, I said, and my voice cracked. It's everything. I don't know if I believe anymore, Ethan. I've been trying for months, and I can't make myself believe. And I can't marry you while I'm feeling this way. I can't stand in the temple and make covenants I'm not sure I can keep. So you're just giving up? His voice was rising now, anger creeping in. You're throwing away everything we have because you read some articles on the internet? They're not just articles. They're on the church's own website. They're facts, Ethan. Facts can be twisted. Satan uses facts to deceive people. He's using your intelligence against you, Emma. That's what he does. I had heard that before, too. My whole life I had been warned about the dangers of thinking too much, of relying on worldly knowledge instead of spiritual confirmation. Anti-intellectualism was woven into the fabric of the culture I had grown up in. Be smart, but not too smart. Study, but don't question. Learn, but don't doubt. Is there someone else? Ethan asked suddenly, his eyes searching my face. Are you seeing someone else? No, I said. There's no one else. This is about me, Ethan. About what I believe, or what I can't believe anymore. He shook his head slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice was cold. You're going to destroy your family. You know that, right? If you go down this path, you're going to destroy everyone who loves you. I didn't have an answer to that. I just sat there, tears streaming down my face, as the man I had planned to marry looked at me like I was a stranger. I asked him not to tell my parents. I needed time, I said. Time to figure things out, time to find the right words, time to prepare for a conversation I knew would be devastating. Ethan agreed, though reluctantly. He said he would give me a week. He said he hoped I would come to my senses. He said he would pray for me. Have you ever felt trapped between who you were supposed to be and who you really are? Have you ever lived in that impossible space, knowing that being honest would cost you everything? If you have, I would love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. You might be surprised how many people understand exactly what you're going through. Ethan didn't give me a week. He gave me 3 days. I came home for Sunday dinner, just like I did every week. My parents' house was exactly as it always was, the smell of roast beef in the air, the table set with the good china, the picture of the Salt Lake Temple hanging in the hallway. But the moment I walked through the door, I knew something was different. The air felt heavy, charged. My brothers were there, which was unusual for a regular Sunday dinner. Tyler and Josh stood in the living room with their wives, everyone dressed in their Sunday best, everyone avoiding my eyes. Come sit down, Emma, my father said. His voice was strange, formal, the voice he used when he was speaking as bishop rather than as dad. I sat in the chair they indicated, facing the couch where my parents sat. My brothers and their wives arranged themselves around the room like witnesses at a trial. My mother was already crying, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ethan called us, my father said. He's very concerned about your salvation. My heart stopped. The room tilted. I gripped the armrests of my chair and tried to keep my face neutral, but I could feel the blood draining from my cheeks. He told us you've been reading anti-Mormon materials, my father continued. He told us you've been expressing doubts about the church. He told us you broke off the engagement because you don't believe Joseph Smith was a prophet. That's not exactly what I said, I managed. And they're not anti-Mormon materials. They're essays on the church's own website. The Gospel Topics essays are meant for people with strong testimonies, my father said, echoing what he must have heard from someone else, a church leader, a manual, a training document. People who can read them in context and not lose their faith. Clearly, you weren't ready for that kind of information. So the information is true, but I wasn't supposed to know it? Don't take that tone with your father, my mother said through her tears. We're trying to help you, Emma. We're trying to save you. What followed was not a conversation. It was an intervention. My brothers took turns reading scriptures about the dangers of apostasy. Tyler quoted from Alma about the sons of Mosiah who had fallen away and how they had caused great harm to the church. Josh read from Doctrine and Covenants about the importance of enduring to the end. Their wives nodded along, occasionally offering supportive murmurs. My father spoke about the sacred covenants I had made at baptism and in the temple, about how breaking those covenants had eternal consequences. My mother wept and pleaded and told me about the sleepless nights she had spent since Ethan's call, praying for my soul. I tried to explain. I tried to tell them about the things I had learned, the questions I couldn't answer, the faith I had tried so desperately to hold on to. But every time I spoke, I was interrupted. Every concern I raised was dismissed as Satan's influence. Every fact I cited was reframed as a lie dressed up as truth. The church has enemies, my father said. They have always had enemies. They create these documents and websites specifically to lead people like you astray. You're playing right into their hands. But the essays are published by the church, I said again. They're not from enemies, they're from the church itself. Then they're being taken out of context. Or you're reading them with the wrong spirit. When you read with the Spirit of the Lord, you receive confirmation of the truth. When you read with a critical spirit, you find only doubt. I looked around the room at the faces of my family, my brothers, who I had looked up to my entire life, who had been my protectors and my examples, their wives, who had been like sisters to me, my mother, who had taught me to pray, who had held me when I cried, who had told me every day that I was a daughter of God, my father, the bishop, the patriarch, the man whose approval I had spent my entire life seeking. None of them were listening to me. None of them wanted to understand. They wanted me to recant. They wanted me to admit I was wrong, to blame Satan, to promise to do better, to return to the fold. They wanted the old Emma back, the obedient Emma, the perfect Emma who never questioned anything. But that Emma was already gone. She had died slowly over the past year, murdered by information she was never supposed to find. And I couldn't resurrect her no matter how much they wanted me to. I took a deep breath. I looked at my mother, at her tear-streaked face, at the desperate hope in her eyes, and I told the truth. I don't believe Joseph Smith was a prophet, I said. My voice was steady, clearer than I expected. I don't believe the Book of Mormon is true. I have tried for over a year to make myself believe, and I can't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I can't pretend anymore. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I could hear my mother's breath catch in her throat. And then she stood up. She looked at me with eyes I had never seen before. Empty eyes. Dead eyes. Eyes that held no love, no recognition, no connection at all. The Emma I raised died today, she said. I don't know who you are. She walked out of the room. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard the bedroom door close. My father stared at the carpet, his jaw clenched, his hands folded in his lap. My brothers exchanged glances but said nothing. Their wives looked away. I sat there, frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to cry. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of it. My mother had just told me I was dead. Not metaphorically dead, not spiritually dead, dead, gone, erased. And in that moment, surrounded by the family I had loved my entire life, I had never felt more alone. An hour later, my father knocked on my bedroom door. I had retreated upstairs, needing to get away from the silent judgment of the living room, needing to be anywhere but in their presence. I was lying on my bed, the same bed I had slept in since childhood, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I had stuck on the ceiling when I was 8. "Your mother needs some space," he said from the doorway. He didn't come in. He didn't look at me. "It's probably best if you stay somewhere else for a few days." A few days. Such a small phrase. Such a temporary-sounding solution. Just a few days, until things calm down, until we figure this out, until we find a way forward. But I knew, even then, that there would be no way forward. I knew that those few days would stretch into weeks, and the weeks into months, and the months into years. I knew that when I walked out that door, I might never walk back in. I packed a single suitcase. I took clothes, toiletries, my laptop, a few books. I left behind the scriptures on my nightstand, the young women medallion on my dresser, the framed photo of me and Ethan at Temple Square. I left behind 19 years of my life, everything I had ever known, everything I had ever been. I had $400 in my checking account. I had nowhere to go. I had no friends outside the church, no family who would take me in, no support system of any kind. I was 19 years old, and I was completely, utterly alone. I walked downstairs with my suitcase. The living room was empty now, my brothers and their wives having left at some point while I was packing. My father stood by the front door, arms crossed, face unreadable. "I'll pray for you," he said. "I hope you find your way back." I wanted to hug him. I wanted to throw myself into his arms and tell him I was sorry, that I would try harder, that I would do whatever it took to make this right. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. I knew that the only way back was to deny everything I had learned, to pretend I still believed, to live a lie for the rest of my life. I couldn't do it. I couldn't unknow what I knew. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. So I walked past him, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cold March night. I heard my mother crying somewhere upstairs. I heard the door close behind me, and then there was only silence, and the sound of my suitcase wheels on the concrete, and the vast, terrifying emptiness of my new life. I walked to the bus stop at the end of the street, the same bus stop where I had waited for the school bus every morning as a child. I sat on the bench and waited, my suitcase beside me, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was going to do. I only knew that I couldn't go back. I had lost everything. My family, my faith, my future, my entire identity. I was no longer Emma Richardson, daughter of Bishop Richardson, future wife and mother, faithful member of the church. I was no one. Nothing. A blank page with no words written on it. But somewhere, deep beneath the grief and the terror and the overwhelming loneliness, there was something else. A tiny spark, barely visible, easily extinguished. Something that felt almost like freedom. Almost like possibility. Almost like hope. Rock bottom has a strange gift. When you lose everything, you finally get to choose who you want to be. The only problem was, I had no idea where to start. The bus took me to Salt Lake City. I don't remember making a conscious decision to go there, but it was the only place I could think of that wasn't Provo, wasn't home, wasn't surrounded by people who knew me and my family. I sat in the back of the bus with my suitcase wedged between my knees, watching the lights of the city approach through the rain-streaked window. It was almost midnight. I had nowhere to sleep. I had no plan at all. In the weeks before everything fell apart, when I was still researching in secret, still trying to make sense of what I was learning, I had found an online community. It was a subreddit called RRX-Mormon, a place where thousands of people shared their stories of leaving the church. I had lurked there for months, reading posts from people who had gone through exactly what I was going through. Some of their stories were heartbreaking, some were angry, some were hopeful. All of them made me feel less alone. There was one user who had posted frequently, a woman named Sarah who lived in Salt Lake. She had left the church 5 years earlier and had made it her mission to help others who were in crisis. Her posts always ended with the same message: if you need help, reach out. No one should have to go through this alone. I had never reached out. I had been too scared, too ashamed, too hopeful that maybe I wouldn't need to. But now, sitting on that bus with $400 and no future, I had no choice. I pulled out my phone and sent her a direct message. I just left my family. I'm on a bus to Salt Lake. I have nowhere to go. I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to ask. The response came within minutes. Don't apologize. Where does the bus drop you off? I'll be there. Sarah was waiting for me at the bus station. She was in her early 30s, with short brown hair and kind eyes that looked like they had seen too much. She didn't ask questions that night. She just took my suitcase, led me to her car, and drove me to her apartment on the east side of the city. You can stay on the couch as long as you need, she said. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. I slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through unfamiliar windows, and for a moment I didn't know where I was. Then the memories came flooding back, and the weight of them pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. Sarah was already awake, sitting at her small kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She saw me looking at it and smiled. You can try some if you want, she said. It won't damn you to hell, I promise. I had never tasted coffee in my life. The word of wisdom had been drilled into me since childhood, the prohibition against coffee and tea and alcohol presented as a test of obedience, a marker of faithfulness. But I wasn't faithful anymore, was I? I wasn't anything anymore. I sat down across from her and wrapped my hands around the mug she offered me. The coffee was bitter and strange, nothing like I expected, but I drank it anyway. It felt like a small act of rebellion, a tiny declaration of independence. It tasted like freedom. So, Sarah said gently, do you want to talk about it? And I did. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I talked to someone who actually listened. I told her about the Gospel Topics essays, about the CES letter, about the year of silent struggle and secret research. I told her about Ethan, about the intervention, about my mother's words. I told her about walking out of my parents' house with a suitcase and $400. I told her everything. Sarah nodded throughout, her expression sad but unsurprised. She had heard versions of this story many times before. She had lived her own version of it. The first thing you need to know, she said when I finished, is that you're not crazy. Everything you're feeling right now, the grief, the confusion, the anger, it's all normal. You're not broken. You're waking up. It doesn't feel like waking up, I said. It feels like dying. I know. That's because a part of you is dying. The person you were taught to be, the identity that was constructed for you, that's falling away. And it hurts like hell. But underneath all of that, there's a real you. A you that gets to decide who she wants to be. And I promise, when you finally meet her, it will be worth all of this pain. I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted to believe that there was something on the other side of this darkness, some version of myself that was whole and happy and free. But in that moment, I couldn't see it. All I could see was wreckage. The first few months were the hardest of my life. I got a job as a barista at a coffee shop downtown, which felt absurdly ironic given my lifetime of abstinence. The work was simple, mindless, which was good because my mind was rarely present. I moved through my shifts like a ghost, making drinks, cleaning tables, smiling at customers while inside I felt absolutely nothing. I couldn't eat. Food tasted like cardboard, and the effort of preparing meals felt insurmountable. I lost 15 pounds in 6 weeks. My clothes hung off my frame. Sarah started leaving snacks on the counter for me, granola bars and fruit and anything she thought I might actually consume. I couldn't sleep either. Or rather, I couldn't stop sleeping. Some days I would come home from my shift, collapse on the couch, and not move for 14 or 15 hours. It wasn't restful sleep. It was escape. Unconsciousness was the only relief I could find from the relentless loop of memories and regrets and what-ifs that played constantly in my head. I checked my phone obsessively, hoping for a message from my family. Some sign that they still loved me, some indication that they were willing to talk, to listen, to try to understand. But there was nothing. My brothers had blocked me on social media. My parents' number went straight to voicemail when I tried to call. It was as if I had been surgically removed from their lives, every trace of my existence carefully excised. The silence was worse than anger would have been. Anger would have meant they still cared. Silence meant I had ceased to exist. I started seeing a therapist, at Sarah's insistence. Her name was Dr. Kimball, and she specialized in something called religious trauma syndrome. I had never heard that term before, but the moment she explained it, I recognized myself in every word. The anxiety, the depression, the identity confusion, the difficulty trusting my own perceptions, all of it was a predictable response to leaving a high-demand religion. I wasn't broken, I was injured, and injuries could heal. Dr. Kimball asked me questions no one had ever asked me before. What do you want? What do you enjoy? What do you believe? Not what you were taught to believe, but what you actually believe based on your own experience and reasoning. I sat in her office week after week, struggling to answer, realizing with growing horror that I had no idea. I was 20 years old, and I had never made a single decision for myself. Not really. Every choice I had ever made had been filtered through the expectations of my parents, my church, my community. What to wear, how to speak, who to date, what to study, how to spend my time, it had all been predetermined. I had followed a script written by other people, and now that the script was gone, I didn't know how to improvise. Think of it this way, Dr. Kimball said during one of our sessions. You've spent your entire life being an effect. Other people made decisions, and you responded to those decisions. Now you get to be a cause. You get to make decisions, and the world responds to you. That's terrifying, but it's also the most powerful thing a person can experience. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed, being a cause instead of an effect, taking action instead of just reacting. It sounded simple, but it required a complete rewiring of how I understood myself and my place in the world. I had been taught that obedience was the highest virtue, that submission to authority was the path to happiness, that my own desires and instincts were not to be trusted. Unlearning those lessons would take years, but I had time. For the first time in my life, I had nothing but time. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. I moved out of Sarah's apartment after 3 months and into a tiny studio of my own, the first space I had ever lived in alone. It was cramped and drafty, and the radiator made strange noises at night, but it was mine. I decorated it with things I actually liked, not things that were appropriate or modest or church-approved. I bought a poster of a mountain landscape that reminded me of Utah without reminding me of home. I bought a plant and named it something ridiculous and felt a small spark of joy when it didn't immediately die. I kept working at the coffee shop, but I also enrolled in community college classes. I wasn't sure what I wanted to study, so I took a little of everything: English literature, psychology, art history. I discovered that I loved learning when the learning was my choice, when I could explore ideas without being told what conclusions I was supposed to reach. In my psychology class, we studied something called the locus of control. People with an internal locus of control believe that their actions shape their outcomes. People with an external locus of control believe that outside forces, fate, luck, other people determine what happens to them. I recognized myself immediately in the second category. My entire life, I had believed that God was in control, that the church was in control, that my parents and leaders knew what was best for me. My job was simply to obey. But what if that wasn't true? What if I had the power to shape my own life? What if every choice I made, no matter how small, was a ripple that spread outward into the universe, creating effects I couldn't even imagine? The idea was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. 6 months after I left Provo, I made a decision that felt impossibly bold. I was going to leave Utah. There were too many memories there, too many reminders of the life I had lost. Every time I saw the temple gleaming on the hill, every time I passed a meeting house, every time I heard the word Mormon in casual conversation, the wound reopened. I needed to go somewhere new, somewhere I could be anonymous, somewhere I could start fresh. I chose Portland, Oregon. I had never been there, but it seemed as far from Provo as I could get while still staying in the western United States. It was known for being liberal, secular, accepting. It was a place where I could figure out who I was without the weight of my past pressing down on me. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and boarded a Greyhound bus heading north. I watched Utah disappear behind me through the window, the mountains fading into the distance, the sky opening up vast and empty and full of possibility. I cried for the first hour. Not from sadness exactly, from relief, from fear, from the overwhelming strangeness of being the author of my own story. Portland was everything I hoped it would be, and nothing like I expected. I arrived in late autumn, when the trees were blazing with color and the rain fell in soft, constant drizzles. I found a room in a shared house with 3 other young women, none of whom were Mormon, none of whom knew anything about my past. To them, I was just Emma, a quiet girl from Utah who was trying to figure out her life. They didn't ask too many questions, and I didn't volunteer too many answers. I transferred my community college credits to Portland State University and declared a major in elementary education. I had always loved children, loved the way they saw the world with fresh eyes, loved their capacity for wonder and curiosity. Maybe, I thought, I could help other children grow up with the freedom to ask questions, to explore ideas, to think for themselves. Maybe I could give them what I had never been given. The transition was harder than I expected. I had to learn how to make friends outside of the pre-built community of a church ward. I had to learn how to navigate social situations without the structure of church activities. I had to learn how to trust people, slowly, carefully, without the assumption that everyone shared my beliefs and values. I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong people. I dated men who were nothing like Ethan, which was sometimes good and sometimes very, very bad. I drank alcohol for the first time and discovered that I hated beer but liked wine. I went to parties where I felt awkward and out of place, where everyone seemed to know social rules I had never been taught. I fumbled and failed and picked myself up and tried again, but I also succeeded. I made real friends, people who liked me for who I was, not for how well I performed my assigned role. I discovered that I was funny, genuinely funny, when I wasn't constantly monitoring myself for inappropriate humor. I discovered that I had opinions about politics, about art, about the world, opinions that I had suppressed for years because they didn't align with what I was supposed to believe. Most importantly, I discovered that I was strong, stronger than I ever knew. I had survived the worst thing I could imagine, the loss of my family and my faith, and I was still here, still breathing, still building a life, one small choice at a time. The first Christmas alone was brutal. I couldn't afford to go anywhere, and I didn't have any local friends who could include me in their celebrations. I sat in my room while my housemates went home to their families, and I felt the absence of my own family like a physical pain in my chest. I thought about calling my parents. I picked up my phone a dozen times, stared at my mother's contact photo, her smiling face from a happier time. But I couldn't make myself dial. I didn't know what I would say. And I was terrified of hearing her voice, of hearing her tell me again that I was dead to her. Instead, I went for a walk in the rain. Portland is beautiful in the rain, the streets glistening, the air fresh and clean. I walked for hours, through neighborhoods I had never seen, past houses glowing with Christmas lights, past churches where I didn't belong. I thought about all the Christmases of my childhood, the traditions, the warmth, the certainty that my family would always be there. And then I thought about the future, about the Christmases that were still to come, the traditions I would create for myself, the family I would choose rather than the one I was born into. I didn't know what that family would look like yet, but I knew, with a certainty I couldn't explain, that it was out there somewhere, waiting for me to find it. I went back to my empty room and made myself a cup of hot chocolate, the real kind, the kind I had always loved even when I was supposed to avoid it because of the caffeine. I sat by the window and watched the rain fall, and for the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't grief or anger or fear. I felt peace. It was small and fragile and easily shattered, but it was there, and it was mine. By the time I graduated from Portland State at 24, I was a different person than the girl who had left Provo 5 years earlier. I had a degree in elementary education. I had a circle of friends who knew my whole story and loved me anyway. I had a sense of who I was, not defined by my family or my religion, but by my own choices, my own values, my own hard-won wisdom. I got a job teaching second grade at a public school in Northeast Portland. The first day I stood in front of my classroom, looking at 20 pairs of curious eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: purpose, meaning, a reason to get up in the morning that had nothing to do with obedience or obligation or fear. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because God had placed me there, not because some external authority had assigned me this role, but because I had chosen it. I had walked through fire to get here, and the scars were still visible, but I was here, alive, present, real. I thought about my mother often. I wondered if she thought about me. I wondered if she regretted what she had said, if she wished she could take it back, if she cried herself to sleep sometimes the way I did. I wanted to believe that somewhere, beneath the layers of religious conditioning and social pressure, there was a part of her that still loved me. The real me, not the Emma she had tried to create, but the Emma I had become. But I couldn't know. The silence stretched on, vast and unbroken, and I had to accept that it might never end. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, exactly 7 years after I left home, a letter arrived. I knew immediately it was from my father. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope, the same careful cursive he had used to write my name on birthday cards and permission slips. My hands shook as I opened it. I sat on my couch and read his words, and the girl I had been came rushing back, the grief I had carefully buried rising to the surface like something that had never really died. What I read would change everything. Again. The letter was 2 pages long, written on the same cream-colored stationery my father had used for church correspondence when he was bishop. I could picture him at his desk, the same desk where he had prepared sacrament meeting programs and written notes to struggling ward members. Now he was writing to his estranged daughter, and I had no idea what to expect. I read it 3 times before I could fully absorb the words. "Dear Emma," it began. "I have started this letter 100 times over the past 7 years. I have written drafts and thrown them away. I have picked up the phone and put it back down. I have composed emails and deleted them before sending. Every time I have stopped myself, convinced that reaching out would only make things worse. But I cannot stay silent any longer. You are my daughter, and I need you to know that I still love you." My vision blurred with tears. I blinked them away and kept reading. He wrote about the night I left. How he had stood at the window and watched me walk to the bus stop, my suitcase trailing behind me. How he had wanted to run after me, to bring me back inside, to tell me that we could work this out. But he hadn't. He had let me go. And he had regretted it every day since. He wrote about my mother, how she had cried for weeks after I left, how she had barely eaten, how she had aged 10 years in the span of months. He explained that her words that night had come from a place of profound grief, that she had felt like she was losing me to something she couldn't understand, something that threatened everything she believed about the world and her family's place in it. He didn't excuse what she said. He just tried to explain it. "Your mother loves you," he wrote. "She has always loved you, but her love is tangled up with her faith in ways that are difficult for her to separate. When you told us you no longer believed, she felt like she was losing you forever, not just in this life, but in eternity. The doctrine she has built her life around teaches that families can be together forever, but only if everyone remains faithful. When you left the church, she believed she was losing you for all of eternity. That grief was more than she could bear. I understood what he was saying, even though it hurt to read. I had grown up with the same doctrine. I knew the weight of eternal families, the terror of separation that the church instilled in its members. The message was clear: stay faithful, or lose your family forever. It was a powerful tool of control, and it worked exactly as intended. My father continued. He told me that he thought about me constantly, that he followed my life from a distance through the occasional glimpse on social media before my brothers blocked me, that he knew I had become a teacher and that he was proud of me, even though he couldn't say so publicly without causing conflict in the family. He told me that he prayed for me every night, not for me to come back to the church, but for me to be happy, for me to find peace. "I know you have built a life for yourself," he wrote. "I know you have found your own path. I am not writing to ask you to come back to the church. I have accepted that you have made your choice, and I respect it, even if I do not fully understand it. I am writing because I needed you to know that you are still my daughter. You will always be my daughter. Nothing you could ever do or believe could change that." Then came the part that broke me. "I cannot promise you that your mother will reach out. She is not ready. Her faith is too intertwined with her pain, and she cannot see past it yet. Your brothers have their own struggles with this situation, their own fears about what your leaving means for them and their children. I cannot speak for any of them. I can only speak for myself." He closed with these words: "I hope that someday we can sit together again. I hope that someday the wounds will heal enough for us to rebuild what was broken. But even if that day never comes, I want you to know that I love you. I have always loved you. And I am sorry for every moment of pain that my silence has caused you. Your father, Richard." I sat on my couch and sobbed. Not quiet tears, not dignified crying, but great heaving sobs that shook my whole body. 7 years of grief came pouring out. All the pain I had stuffed down and locked away. All the questions I had never been able to ask. All the love I had never stopped feeling for the family that had rejected me. He loved me. My father still loved me. It wasn't everything. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't my mother taking back her words or my brothers unblocking me on social media or an invitation to come home for Christmas. But it was something. It was a crack in the wall, a sliver of light in the darkness. It was proof that the people I had loved still existed somewhere behind the doctrine and the fear. I didn't know what to do with the letter. For days, I carried it with me everywhere, reading it on my lunch break, reading it before bed, reading it until the creases were worn soft and the paper was stained with tears. I wrote a dozen responses, each one different, each one inadequate. What do you say to someone who broke your heart and then apologized 7 years later? What words could possibly bridge that gap? In the end, I decided not to respond. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I wasn't ready. The wound was too fresh again, too raw. I needed time to process, to think, to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, was possible after everything that had happened. I talked to Dr. Kimball about it in our next session. I hadn't seen her regularly in years, but I had started going back after the letter arrived. She listened as I read her the key passages, her expression thoughtful and compassionate. "How do you feel?" she asked when I finished. "Everything," I said. "I feel everything at once, angry and grateful and sad and hopeful and terrified. I feel like I'm 19 again, walking to that bus stop with my suitcase. I feel like all the healing I've done has been erased." "It hasn't been erased," she said. "The healing is still there, but grief isn't linear. It comes in waves. Sometimes you think you've moved past something, and then a trigger brings it all back. That doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're human." She asked me what I wanted, not what I thought I should want, not what would be easiest or most noble, but what I actually wanted in my deepest heart. "I want my mom to call me," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "I want her to say she's sorry. I want her to tell me she loves me no matter what I believe. I want to go home for Thanksgiving and have it be normal, have it be like it used to be before everything fell apart. And if that never happens?" The question hung in the air. I had spent 7 years learning to live without my family. I had built a life that didn't depend on them. But some part of me had always been waiting, hoping, believing that someday they would come around, that someday love would win out over doctrine. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know if I can fully let go. But I also can't keep waiting for something that might never come. I've spent too much of my life waiting for other people to give me permission to be happy. Dr. Kimball smiled. That sounds like wisdom to me. I'd love to know what moment in this story hit you the hardest. Or maybe you have your own story of losing and finding yourself, of waiting for healing that might never come. Share it in the comments. You might be surprised how many people understand exactly what you've been through. The months that followed were a strange mix of grief and growth. I didn't respond to my father's letter, but I didn't throw it away either. I kept it in a box in my closet, along with a few other artifacts from my old life. My young women medallion, a photo of my family from before everything fell apart. The promise ring Ethan had given me, which I had found at the bottom of a drawer when I was packing to leave Utah. I couldn't quite let go of these things, but I couldn't look at them either. They existed in a kind of limbo, waiting for me to figure out what to do with them. I threw myself into my work. Teaching was a constant reminder that life goes on, that new generations are being born who will never know the specific details of your pain. My second graders didn't know that their teacher had been disowned by her family. They didn't know about the sleepless nights or the therapy sessions or the years of loneliness. They just knew that Miss Richardson was kind and patient and always had goldfish crackers in her desk for snack time. There was one student that year, a little girl named Lily, who reminded me so much of myself at that age. She was quiet and eager to please, always the first to raise her hand, always seeking approval. She came from a religious family, though not Mormon, and I recognized the same patterns in her that I had once exhibited: the need to be perfect, the fear of disappointing the adults in her life, the sense that her worth depended on her obedience. I couldn't tell her that those feelings would one day cause her pain. I couldn't warn her about the crisis that might await her if she ever started asking questions. All I could do was create a classroom where questions were welcomed, where mistakes were okay, where she could be herself without fear of judgment. Maybe it would help, maybe it wouldn't. But it was what I could offer. Spring came to Portland in a riot of cherry blossoms and sudden rainstorms. I turned 27, and my housemates threw me a small party, complete with cake and candles and off-key singing. These were the people who had become my family over the years, the friends who showed up when I needed them, who knew my whole story and loved me anyway. Looking around the room at their faces, I felt a swell of gratitude so intense it brought tears to my eyes. Family is whoever shows up. I had learned that lesson the hard way, but I had learned it. On the last day of the school year, as I was packing up my classroom for the summer, Lily lingered behind. The other children had already run off to meet their parents, but she stood by my desk, fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. "Miss Richardson?" she asked. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Anything." She looked at the floor, then back up at me. "Do you have a big family?" The question caught me off guard. It was so simple, so innocent, and yet it contained multitudes. I thought about my parents, thousands of miles away in Provo. My father, who had finally reached out after 7 years of silence. My mother, who still couldn't bring herself to speak to me. My brothers, who had blocked me on social media, who were raising children who didn't know their aunt existed. I thought about the family I had lost, the family I had mourned, the family I had finally stopped waiting for. And I thought about the family I had found. Sarah, who had taken me in when I had nowhere to go. My housemates, who had become sisters in every way that mattered. My friends, who had seen me at my worst and loved me anyway. Dr. Kimball, who had helped me rebuild myself from the wreckage. And these children, these 20 small humans who had trusted me to guide them through a year of their lives. "I have people who love me," I said finally. "And I have people I love. That's what family is." Lily considered this for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. She smiled, waved goodbye, and ran out the door to where her mother was waiting. I stood alone in my classroom, surrounded by empty desks and colorful bulletin boards, and the lingering smell of crayons and glue. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. I could hear the sounds of summer beginning outside, children laughing, car doors slamming, the world moving on. I thought about everything I had been through to get here. The girl who had grown up in Provo, so certain of her path. The young woman who had discovered uncomfortable truths and couldn't unknow them. The daughter who had been told she was dead by the mother who gave her life. The stranger who had boarded a bus with $400 and no future. The survivor who had rebuilt herself from nothing. I used to believe that family was blood, that love was obedience, that faith was certainty. I was wrong about all of it. Family is whoever chooses to stay. Love is acceptance without conditions. And faith, real faith, is trusting yourself even when you don't have all the answers. It's believing that you can survive the worst things life throws at you. It's knowing that even when everything falls apart, you have the power to put the pieces back together in a new shape, a shape of your own design. My mother said I died that day in her living room. For a long time, I believed her. I felt dead, hollowed out, erased from existence. I went through the motions of living without actually being alive. But sitting in my classroom, watching the sun pour through the windows, I finally understood the truth. I hadn't died that day. Something had died. Yes, the false self I had been taught to be. The obedient daughter. The perfect Mormon girl. The woman who existed only to meet other people's expectations. That version of me was gone forever. But underneath all of that, buried beneath years of conditioning and fear and shame, there was a real Emma. A woman who loved children and coffee and rainy Portland mornings. A woman who had opinions and desires and dreams that belonged to no one but herself. A woman who had been forged in fire and had emerged stronger than she ever knew she could be. I hadn't died. I had finally been born. The road ahead was still uncertain. I didn't know if my mother would ever speak to me again. I didn't know if my brothers would ever unblock me. I didn't know if my father's letter was the beginning of reconciliation or just a brief moment of weakness that would never be repeated. I didn't know anything about the future, except that it would be mine to create, and that was enough. For the first time in my life, not knowing was enough. I didn't need certainty. I didn't need someone else to tell me the plan. I didn't need permission to be happy. I had myself. I had my choices. I had the life I had built with my own two hands. I picked up the last of my belongings, turned off the lights, and walked out of the classroom. The summer stretched before me, 3 months of possibility. I was thinking about taking a trip, maybe to the Oregon coast, maybe somewhere I had never been. I was thinking about reading all the books I had never had time to read, about learning to cook something more complicated than pasta, about calling Sarah and thanking her again for saving my life 8 years ago. I was thinking about writing a letter to my father. Not today, maybe not this month, but someday. When I was ready. When I knew what I wanted to say. The sun was warm on my face as I stepped outside. A group of former students waved at me from across the parking lot, and I waved back. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear music playing, something hopeful and bright. I walked to my car, got in, and sat there for a moment, just breathing, just existing. Just being grateful for the simple miracle of being alive. Life moves in waves. There are moments when you're lifted high, when you can see for miles, when everything seems possible. And there are moments when you crash, when you're dragged under, when you think you'll never surface again. But the waves keep coming. The tide keeps turning. And if you can just hold on, if you can just keep swimming, eventually you find yourself on shore. Battered and exhausted, but alive. I had been broken. I had been lost. I had been told that I was dead by the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally. But I was still here. Still breathing. Still building a life. One choice at a time. And that life, imperfect and uncertain and entirely my own, was the most beautiful thing I had ever created. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. The road opened up before me, endless and unknown. I didn't have a map. I didn't need one. I knew where I was going. Home. Not to Provo. Not to my parents' house. Not to the church or the certainties of my childhood. Home to myself. To the life I had chosen. To the family I had found. To the woman I had become. And for the first time in 7 years, I knew that was exactly where I belonged.